Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Leah Morgan and today I'm going to give you a free pattern for the market-friendly pop-up crossbody. So here I am grabbing the fabric that I'm going to use for the pocket. The pocket is going to be the main showpiece of the bag. So make sure to fussy cut the piece you want and make sure that it's right side up when you're fusing it to the inner facing. So your pieces you're going to need are going to be 7 inches wide by 9 inches tall. You're going to need 4 of them from the fabric. So you have your inside pieces, then you have the pocket piece, which is going to be a 7 by 7 square, and you're going to need a backing for that as well. And so you'll have 2 sides, front and back, and the pocket front and back. So this is the part where you can design and play around a little bit. Here you see that I'm actually going to use this as one inside of the pocket to the bag instead of going matchy-matchy. So this is where you can be creative. So just to reiterate, you're going to need 2 7 by 9 squares for the front and 2 7 by 9 squares for the inside, and then you're also going to need 2 7 by 7 squares for the pocket piece. Next, you're going to want to cut 2 7 by 9 pieces of double-sided foam interfacing, and you'll also want to cut a 7 by 7 foam interfacing piece, and you're going to fuse both of those fabrics to either side. So you have a front and a back for each foam interfacing you've cut out. Here I grabbed my number 5 zipper, and you're just going to cut about a 1/2 inch over what the size of that is. Also, you'll need to cut a piece of bias binding, so a 2.5 inch strip out of a coordinating piece of fabric. And here's where you can also kind of decide from a design standpoint what look you're going for. So you can see here, I'm taking some of my scrap and seeing what colorway I prefer. So before you sew anything on, you're going to actually make sure that the fabric, the directional fabric is right side up, and that you get your 2.5 inch binding, that's the length of the pocket, and go ahead and your favorite way to bind, go ahead and bind. For me personally, I put it on the back and roll it to the front and sew. That's how I like it. You can do it however you want. So here you can see that I actually did sew the binding wrong side up, which is fine. But at this point, you're going to want to sew on all 3 sides. Leave that pocket opening not sewn. Obviously, you want to put your stuff in the pocket. So you'll just kind of sew around every side, but that double stitch on the openings. And here where I'm pointing, I'm just saying you need a 1/4 inch in. So you want to be sewing a 1/4 inch in, and then double stitching, back stitching to secure it. Then you're going to want to square up each pocket, each side, because this is going to help you get this really straight, even looking bag. So this is very important. Do not skip this step. You really need to match each one up to each other and make sure that they're square. Otherwise, you're going to get a very wonky looking bag, and you don't want that as just from aesthetics. So I'm going to double check, make sure each square is matching up to each other, and then once I have that how I like it and it's matched, then I'm going to go ahead and add the zipper to the top of each side. And so on this, what you want to do, right sides together, and then you're going to sew about a 1/4 inch in. You're going to flip it over, and you're going to sew down that other side about an 1/8 inch from the edge. And so that will give you a very clean look. And you're also going to want to have the zipper edge about a scant
Just to show you on here.
Not even 1/8 of an inch, but scant, hanging over your project. That way when you do turn it and you sew it on the 1/8 inch side, you will have a nice clean seam, and it's going to hug all those loose frayed hairs and ends. Just a little trick I learned from watching By Annie. Also at this step, you will want to use a zipper foot or a narrow type of foot. That way you can get closer to the zippered edge. If you use a regular all-purpose foot, you're going to go less than 1/4 of an inch away. So as you can see here, I'm turning it over, and then you're going to sew right 1/8 of an inch in on that line right there, so that when you turn it back over, it's going to give a nice seamed finish. And so you're just going to find that point, and then just really be careful, take your time, and go down. And as you can see, that edge of the zipper is actually enclosing the hairs and all the raw edge, so that you don't have to finish it again. You can if you want, but this allows you to not have to finish that. And so when I'm turning it over, you can see it's a nice finish right there. Okay, so you're going to want to do the same thing to the other side, right sides together, zipper and the back piece of your pocket purse. And then you'll just repeat what we just did. And important here is you're going to want to line up the edges of the bag to each other. So you don't want to have a mismatched seam or edge because you didn't match up the zipper. Okay. And then make sure to put a zipper slide on the zipper. That's very important. Don't forget that. Okay, and so when you're sewing the edges down, make sure to tuck the zipper ends into the inside of the bag, and you're going to catch them as you sew around. This is a little tricky. Make sure you're using a denim needle, and make sure you're going slow. So the needle is very important. You're going to change out your needle to a denim needle. You can find it at Hobby Lobby or wherever. Anyway, so you're going to sew around the bag, and don't obviously sew at the top because you need to undo the zipper. And then here, this is kind of optional, but I want to show you. I really liked this little scripture she had on the selvage. And so I took that. I got a piece of little gross grain ribbon, and I put some interfacing on the selvage, and I cut off the fray of it, and then I sewed it on to the ribbon. And I probably should have done this in a previous step, but here I'm just kind of figuring out where I want it. And you can add like little touches to your bag, little personalizations, or if you want to put like rickrack, or you want to put like a little trim, you can do that. Then you will want to cut a long piece of bias binding. I do 2.5 inches wide, and then I iron that in half. And then here I'm just going around the corners here, and it's pretty similar to binding a quilt. That's how I bind my bags. That way I can get a nice clean finish. And so you're just going to bind that. I do 1/4 inch in from the edge, and I do start with the bias edge on the back of the project, and I'm going to sew that all around. And so if you have a tag, like I do, like my little cloth tag, make sure to sew that on the bag first. And if it's a side one like mine is, fold that down as you put the bias binding on the bag. And you'll see here, I'm gonna fold that tag. See, I'm trying to figure it out here, but I'm gonna fold that down like that, and sew all the raw edges right there. That way when I flip it over, there's no rawness showing. And then, of course, when you get to the end of the bag, because there is that heavy bulk of the zipper, make sure you go slow, I had to hand crank the wheel to go over those big portions, so just make sure that you're being cautious because you could probably break a needle. I've done it several times, and it's very traumatizing watching my machine break needles, so I try not to at all costs. But here, just to finish it, I fold about 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch of the end bias over on itself. That way when I flip it over, it's going to be really a lot cleaner, and it's going to kind of sandwich the bag. So here, how I bind my items, I will cut off any bulk that's preventing a nice laying seam of bias. So I'm going to trim that off right there. And you just do whatever works for you. But the bulk, you do want to get rid of that because it won't lay flat. So kind of fiddle with it, make sure it lays flat. And here I'm just going to cut off the edge so that I'm getting a little less overhang with that. And then I kind of fold it and play with it and make sure it'll lay flat, just like so. And because I'm sewing it from the front, some people like to stitch in the ditch, but that's not me. I'm not very good at that. So I will sew it from the front, and the seam on the back isn't really noticeable because it comes out from the entire bag, and it just makes a line of stitching. It's not very noticeable, but here, as you're sewing the bias, make sure to flip over that corner like a mitered end, and that's going to help. And make sure that your foot is letting you put the needle down on that end, and then you can start sewing once again. That's a little tip and trick I've learned. And then you're just going to go down and sew that to the bag, and just kind of, whatever you do, just make sure it's even. If you're pulling it across the bag, make sure that that bias is evenly pulled, however you're pulling it. So that's the main thing, is just uniformity in your work, and that's going to give you a clean finish. So here I'm folding it down, and then I'm folding it over to get that mitered corner. And then I'll kind of push the fabric because my foot doesn't like to let the fabric slide under. It's kind of bulky. And then, yeah, so once you're done, you're almost there. So all we have to do now is add some tabs for the strap. And here you can use either webbing, like a little piece of webbing. You can use material. I'm going to use some of that ribbon I showed you, and I'm going to put that through a D-ring because I'm not going to put a lot of weight in this bag. Doesn't really matter too much what you use. It's going to hold anyway. It's going to hold if you're not putting a lot in there. And so I'm just going to use that because I like to reuse the stuff I have. And then I'll put it on a D-ring and I'll sew it evenly on the bias. And so here you can see I've folded it over, and I'm trying to match it on the bias because of that little scripture additive selvage thing I did on the back. I just want to make it even, and it just looks a little cleaner if you let the edges match up on the bias. And so here I'm actually going about almost a scant 1/4 inch onto the bias from the edge of the webbing, and I'm going to back stitch so that it's secured. And then I'm going to check when I flip it over. I'm going to make sure that it caught the back too, because that's a typical problem you'll find when you're using material. That looks good. Is that the back doesn't catch, and so you just kind of see that I did catch it, but you'll always want to check the other one. So here you can see I'm flipping over the little ribbon so I have a clean edge, and then I put it on the other side. And then for the strap, what I did was I cut 3-inch fabric of my choosing, and I wanted to spice it up a little bit. So I cut a little bit 3-inch strip of this chartreuse color, and then I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to sew each end to my single strip, and that way I'm going to get this cool little funky strap. And so then you're going to go ahead and iron it like you would iron bias, and then you're going to flip it over and iron that again, and so you have this little strap. And then what you'll do is you're going to sew around the edges, and then and here I'm just showing you kind of what it looks like, and so you can kind of judge a little bit on where the bag's going to hang, and that'll be just your preference. You could put a slider adjuster on there, but for this one, since it's going to be mine, I didn't really feel the need to do that. So at this point, we are going to add our little clasps. I use a little lobster clasp, and the size of this one happens to be about 25 millimeters if you're ordering from China. So that's a 25 millimeter opening, little less than an inch, I would say, but they're great for key rings or bag straps. And so you're going to want to fold the end over onto itself so that you have a clean line. And then you're going to sew two lines of stitching, and you're going to back stitch each line so that you have a pretty sturdy little strap. And here it's kind of fiddly because it is material, and I didn't put any interfacing or anything in it, so it's a little fiddly. But once you get it, then it can be straight, and you're just going to sew 2 lines of stitching, back stitching, however much you want. Here I did it just a couple times, and then you're going to do that again, and you'll have 2 lines of stitching. And so as you can see, when I get done with this, it is going to be a little fray. So when you cut the strings, you might have a few little fuzzies, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. And so now you are all done. You're going to attach your strap, and then you're going to be ready to go. And so this literally took me, with doing a video, this took me about an hour to completely do this video. Okay, so here is the finished product. This is a perfect bag to sell at a craft show. It's easy to make, quick to whip up, doesn't cost a lot, and it really feels like a quality product because of that foam interfacing. And people will love this little grab and go product at the craft shows, craft fairs. So if you're looking for an idea, here's a good one. So if you like this video, hit like and subscribe. Bye.